At this point, I would like to introduce our panelists, and I will start by introducing Dr. Jennifer Mills. Dr. Jennifer P. Mills is a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute for Social Research at York University, where her research interests include work related to the Black community in Canada. She's also the chair of the Critical Ethnicity and Anti-Racism Research Cluster of the Canadian Sociological Association. Welcome, Dr. Mills. Our next presenter is Lois Thomas, who is the Congress of Black Women of Canada Ontario Regional Representative. A dedicated community organizer and volunteer, Lois Thomas has been a member of the Congress of Black Women of Canada for over 15 years. She is the regional representative for the Congress of Black Women Ontario, Inc., with responsibility for consistency of leadership among the 8 chapters in Ontario. She coordinates the overall activities for the region through collaboration with partners, agencies, and government bodies. She also holds leadership positions with the Mississauga chapter, where she is currently education coordinator and vice president of the board of directors of the Congress of Black Women of Canada, Mississauga Nonprofit Housing Incorporated, also known as Camille's Place. Welcome, Lois. And our final presenter is Rene Livingston, businesswoman, entrepreneur, and speaker. Rene is the youngest child of George and Kay Livingston's 5 children. Her first entrepreneurial undertaking was the establishment of the market research company Target Research Limited. It became a who's who in the Canadian market research industry. In 2010, influenced by her love of travel, Rene founded Sarlat Properties, an enterprise that specializes in the rental of international vacation properties. In keeping with her mother's example, volunteering in the community is a very important part of Rene's life. Just underway is Rene's latest project, writing an official biography and documentary of her mother, Kay Livingston. Welcome, Rene. And now, without further ado, I turn the discussion over to our first panelist, Rene Livingston.
Hello. Kay Livingston was one of Canada's prominent visionaries, activists, and humanitarians, and she devoted her life to the empowerment of Black women. Kay Livingston was raised in London, Ontario. At an early age, her parents instilled a sense of the Black community. In 1923, her parents founded The Dawn of Tomorrow, the first Black newspaper in Ontario geared to serving the Black community both politically and socially. Her father, James Jenkins, was an assistant judge of the juvenile court, and Christina Jenkins was her mother. They both instilled the importance of Black people staying connected for mutual support. And this photo here is one of the first papers of The Dawn of Tomorrow. After leaving London, Kay Livingston worked at the Bureau of Statistics in Ottawa. Kay and George Livingston met and married in Ottawa in 1942 and raised a family. During that time, they married, and at that time, women did not work outside of the home. So George Livingston came from Antigua, and he was a successful real estate developer, architect, and philanthropist. Kathleen K. Livingston had a vision, and that vision would not have been realized without the support and encouragement of her husband, George Livingston. Because again, women stayed at home at that time. Kay Livingston was deeply involved in expanding a collective awareness and Black pride in Toronto's Black community in the post-Second World War period, all while contributing to the society's well-being through her work with the following organizations: founding president of the Canadian Negro Women's Association, founder of the First National Black Congress, president of the Women's Section of United Nations, Chair, International Affairs, YWCA, Chair, the National Black Coalition, Foreign Affairs Committee, Commissioner of Canadian Council of Churches, member of the Advertising Women's Club, Canadian Council of Churches, public relations consultant. She served on the Appeal Board for Legal Aid, moderator, Heritage Ontario. She was an actress, poet, and a radio host. And this photo here shows the United Nations. They were getting ready for a brunch, and they're holding all of the flags from all over the world, and this was held at the Royal York Hotel. Not confined to the family home, Kay Livingstone maintained a brilliant acting career. She was called one of Canada's leading Black actresses. She also had her own radio show on CBC, CKLY, and she was in several movies and TV shows. Kay Livingstone worked to break down prejudice and promote equality for individuals of all origins and contributed to the development of a more accepting society. So the significance of this photo here is that in here you see Gordon Sinclair. He was a journalist back in the 50s and a very controversial journalist. And he said that he had never been to a Negro person's home. So the newspapers, my mother quoted, "I'd like to have that old guy over to the house for dinner." And so the newspapers got a hold of this quote, and so he was invited over to our house. So this photo here is inside our house, and he's over there, and several other people have joined in. Excuse me. In 1959 were new beginnings. That's when the Canadian Negro Women's Association was formed. In 1951, Kathleen K. Livingstone founded the Canadian Negro Women's Association. When Kay Livingstone moved from Ottawa to Toronto, she joined a Toronto women's social club called the Dilettantes, in which middle-class Black women organized teas, garden parties, and June balls. Well, that wasn't for her. After joining the Dilettantes, Kay Livingstone lost no time in changing both the name and the club's focus. Kay Livingstone was concerned about the education of Black youth as well as social issues facing Black people and Black women through the 1950s and 1970s. She transformed the Dilettantes into the Canadian Negro Women's Club, and then later it was called the Canadian Negro Women's Association. And this picture here, again, at home, many meetings were held at home. You see the original steering committee, it's some of the ladies, and they were always coming over to the house. So to the left is Kay Livingstone, and then you've got Eugenie Allen, Vera Cook, and Aileen Williams, all wonderful friends. So the stated purpose of the new organization, the Canadian Negro Women's Association, was to become aware of and to appreciate and further the merits of the Canadian Negro, to increase the awareness of the media and government institutions concerning the positions of Black women on issues of prejudice and sexism, to create a counter-institutional environment in which Black women would provide meaning for themselves on ideas of Black womanhood, community, and education, for Black women to have a broader political voice. So these are all the things that she encouraged. So as a new organization's first president, she encouraged the other members to take up service projects. So some of the service projects that they organized by the Canadian Negro Women's Association were raising funds for World War II veterans to receive wheelchairs and continue their education, awarding scholarships to deserving Black students. Events such as banquets, luncheon, and Calypso was one of the big ones, were all held as fundraisers. So I'm going to include in here some original quotes from the steering committees as they were interviewed. So Aileen Williams says, "There was little multiculturalism at that time, and there were no government grants. They just didn't exist. So if we were going to make money to help Joe Blow, we had to plan activities and raise the funds so that we would have money to give to them. So regarding Calypso Carnival, it was the first big thing that we railed around and rallied around and tried to promote. And of course, that involved us having to make money. And where was the money going to come from?" So they had to rely on their own ingenuity because Canadian society was not going to assist Black students to attain higher education at that time. This was in the 1950s, really not that long ago. The concept of self-reliance and racial uplift were strong values in place, and they were used to encourage young people. Aileen Williams says, "We set up scholarships. We had different activities that involved young people. We had Calypso Carnival that went on for 10 years, and the money was used to go into our scholarship funds so that we could maintain it. We were involved in quite a few activities. We built a chalet in Ghana. Our members went to and joined in Martin Luther King Walk. Amazing. So this is an article, it actually was a full-page article on Calypso Carnival that the Canadian Negro Women's Association put together. So 1993 was creating a platform, the first National Black Congress. Kay Livingstone was actively engaged in creating a Canada-wide network of Black women. Kay Livingstone was the driving force behind the organization of the first National Congress of Black Women of Canada, which was held in 1973. She wanted to create a nationwide network of Black women. She wanted the women to be able to talk and share their ideas and all their common concerns that Black women had. The Congress meeting included guest speakers from across the country with discussions on topics such as education, immigration, and the portrayal of Black people in the media. And this photo here is, again, it's just a half page. Amazing. This was also taken in our home as well. And you can see they featured the youth. It was all about the youth. And to the far right is actually myself, and then second in is my sister, or actually third in is my sister too as well, and a couple others. So this was the youth group here. So in 1973, here's a picture of the members planning the first National Black Congress. This is also, again, a photo that was in the newspaper that was in our home. Many, many meetings in our home. In 1975, International Women's Year, coining the phrase visible minority. This is when this came about. So Kay Livingstone worked. Her work was not limited to the Black community. In 1975, while working on International Women's Year, Kay Livingstone noticed there were no minorities being represented except for herself. Kay Livingstone brought this to attention to the Privy Council, and as a result, she was appointed as a one-woman investigation committee to go across Canada, contacting women in minority groups and informing them of their rights. That was her inspiration for coining the phrase visible minority. Kay Livingstone worked to involve the nation in a dialogue on the role of women and visible minorities as a consultant for the Privy Council of Canada. Penny Hodge stated, Kay was determined that minority groups would not be overlooked, and it was she who coined the phrase visible minority groups, which has been picked up and used so liberally in the past year by the media. In 1975, Kay Livingstone traveled the country with a plan to organize a national conference of women who belonged to a visible minority group. Upon returning from Mexico, she passed away suddenly, leaving the Black community in shock. In summary, publications about Kay Livingstone all say she was best known for founding the Canadian Negro Women's Association and the first National Black Congress. So what does that mean? What are they really saying? She pushed boundaries. Kathleen Kay Livingstone was the first Black Canadian to unite the African Canadian community. She helped ensure that we had the necessary tools to enable us to take our rightful place in society. Kathleen Kay Livingstone laid the foundation to elevate the Black community. She brought a collective Black voice to the public and the press. The Canadian Negro Women's Association launched Calypso Carnival, as I said earlier, and the first public celebration of Black culture in Canada, and it became the forerunner for Caravana that we all know so well today. The ladies of the Canadian Negro Women's Association often talked about the need for people to know their own history, or for Black people to know their own history. So as a result, they held events such as Negro History Week in 1958, which has grown into Black History Month and the Ontario Black History Society. She was the first Black woman to have her own radio show, the Kay Livingstone Show, celebrating traditions and customs of Black culture around the world. Kay Livingstone coined the phrase visible minority and the phrase onward and upward, lifting as we climb. And that became the motto for the Canadian Negro Women's Association. Kay Livingstone was designated as a National Historic Person on July 19, 2011. A plaque commemorating her was installed at Bedford Park just this last November. And Bedford Park was just down the street from where we lived. This park used to be a forest when we were kids playing, and it's now become a park. So it was amazing for the family to see a plaque just down the street in what used to be a forest and now is a park. Kay Livingstone was recognized by Canada Post with a stamp in her honor in February this year. So this photo here is a picture of the stamp unveiling, and this was done at the Black History brunch. So on February 12, 2018, there was a stamp unveiling in Ottawa. And I'd like to show you a short Canada Post video clip from the event. And please listen very carefully, because Kay Livingstone is reading a poem, and this poem is from her radio show. It was a Thanksgiving radio show, and you'll see that this particular poem kind of relates to Thanksgiving, and she was talking to different people about how they celebrate Thanksgiving and what it means to them from where they come from.
Welcome to Tuesday TV. I'm Marcia Curry, Manager Process Design and Continuous Improvement. As you know, February is Black History Month each year. This year, Canada Post celebrated Black History Month by issuing stamps that honor two great Canadians who've had a profound impact on our country, Lincoln M. Alexander and Kay Livingstone. Now, let's take a look at the amazing achievements of Kay Livingstone.
Black history is Canada's history. The first National Black Congress, what she did is she brought a place that was safe for Black people and women in particular to talk about issues about being Black and also issues about being a woman. She elevated what people thought of Black Canadians or Blacks in general. I remember my sister and I sitting at the kitchen table, and there would be stacks of envelopes and stamps and a little bowl of water in front of us. Our little helper job was to seal the envelopes and put on the stamps. And I always remember there was a picture of the Queen on the stamps. I never would have believed or could have dreamed that one day I would be licking a stamp with a picture of my mom on it. I would like them to remember her as a pioneer and a visionary who pushed boundaries. She also lived by her words, onward and upward, lifting as we climb.
Make me wise so that I may know the things you have taught your children, the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. Make me strong so that not to be superior to my brothers, but to be able to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me ever ready to come to you with straight eyes, so that when life fades as the fading sunset, my spirit is come to you without shame. By Chief Dan George.
Canada Post is proud to share the stories of Miss Livingstone and Mr. Alexander and show off these two beautiful stamps. We did so at several events in February celebrating Black History Month. Hope you enjoyed learning more about these two outstanding Canadians.
Kathleen Kay Livingstone had a significant impact on education and social advancement of Black people in Canada. Kathleen, Kay Livingstone was a visionary, a pioneer, and has continued to influence Black Canadians today.
Thank you so much, Rene. We will now shift to our second panelist, Lois Thomas.
And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be joining you this afternoon to give you a brief overview of the Congress of Black Women of Canada, Ontario region. As Rene pointed out in her presentation, Congress was first started by Kay Livingstone in 1973, when she held the first Congress meeting at the Toronto Westbury Hotel. It was founded with a vision to unite Black women across Canada. The Ontario region of the Congress of Black Women provides leadership and direction to create and maintain relationships among the 8 chapters in Ontario. We have a mission to provide a forum for Black women to identify and address issues and challenges which affects them, their families, and their community. The regional body provides organization visibility, facilitates consultative leadership, and coordinate responses to the concerns and issues of all 8 chapters in Ontario. Our 8 chapters are located in Ajax-Pickering, Brampton, London, Mississauga, North York, Oshawa-Whitby, Scarborough, and Waterloo. The regional structure is regional representative, alternate regional representative, a secretary, and a treasurer. With a focus on the mission to assist Black women and their families, we collaborate to deliver programs and events. For example, we were very instrumental in a lot of the organization around the installation of the plaque for Kay Livingstone in Bedford Park, and also very instrumental in putting on a gala on February 17th at the Courtyard Marriott in Toronto, which was a former Westbury Hotel. We were very active and involved in putting on a gala to celebrate Kay's recognition on a Canada Post stamp. So working within the mission and vision to unite Black women, each chapter is responsible for outreach as is relevant in our respective communities. I must point out that the Congress is a volunteer Black women's organization. The Congress has a history of advocacy and does advocate on behalf of women and their families. We are not a registered charitable organization. We are, however, an incorporated nonprofit organization. We are not a government-funded organization. We do from time to time apply for funding. Sometimes we're successful based on the workshop or program that we plan to offer. And if a particular program or workshop is not already offered through service organizations. At times we support and partner with some of these organizations to help deliver programs to the community. For the most part, our focus has been on education. And again, as Rene pointed out in her presentation, educating the community was paramount in Kay Livingstone's vision for the Congress of Black Women of Canada and also for the former organization, CNEWA. We offer scholarships, tutoring, homework program, and parenting workshops. All 8 chapters award scholarships annually to post-secondary students. We believe it is vital for our students, for our Black community to go beyond high school, and therefore we help where we can in offering scholarships so they can go on to university and colleges. A few chapters also offer scholarships, an adult scholarship and a teacher's scholarship. Over the years, we have held workshops on mental health, women's health and wellness, Black health, financial planning, and wills and estate planning. Several chapters run March break camps and summer camps. We maintain the legacy of Kay Livingstone in that we continue to unite Black women to engage in dialogue that will help to move the community forward. However, a big challenge for the Congress at this time, and I believe for other organizations, is the attracting and retaining new members. We believe the reason for the Congress is as relevant today as it was in 1973. However, some of the challenges for Black women and the reasons women join a women's group have somewhat changed. We believe it's that with so many groups popping up, younger women are looking for more from groups that they lend their energy and time to. They want to make their mark and they want to leave their own legacy. Additionally, from observing the decline of membership over the years and the difficulty to attract and retain younger women, we realized that we must approach organizational capacity building much differently. Last year, we did a survey at one of the chapters. Our survey showed that young adults do not necessarily want to join organizations that their mothers belong to. They do want us to understand that our reality is not necessarily their reality, and they're going to do things much differently. They do want to be mentored by senior and more experienced women. However, not in a talking down to way, not in a lecturing way, but rather in a working together, getting things done together way. They want to be engaged, challenged, and respected. We realize that going forward, we must embrace and build an intergenerational group, a group of daughters, mothers, and grandmothers. This, I believe, is the most effective way to share the wisdom from one generation to the other, and to manage our succession plan to ensure the continuity of the organization. We must create a space for the generation of Black women to come together, to engage and exchange ideas, to share points of view, and to undertake the serious consideration of issues that are vital to the progress of the Black community. I must point out to you that the section highlighted and in quotations was taken directly from the speech Kay Livingston gave in 1973 when she opened the first meeting of the Congress of Black Women. It's amazing how very relevant that those words are today as we move forward. We do not want to forget our history. We must continue to learn from it and press on. We continue to outreach for new members to keep the organization vibrant and relevant going into the future. I must do a little membership pitch here to say that membership is open to any Black woman aged 16 years and over who subscribes to the objectives and purpose of the organization. We also offer associate memberships, which is also extended to individuals or organizations who support the purpose and objectives of the organization. Kay Livingston's legacy lives on in the Congress of Black Women of Canada. We ask you to visit our website for more information on how you can become a member to take this organization forward. Again, please contact me for any additional information as we proceed through this presentation and onwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lois. And now we will shift to our third panelist, Dr. Jennifer Mills.
Thank you, Pran. I want to start, first of all, by just giving a couple of thank yous. So I want to thank Jehovah and Jesus Christ, who make all things possible. Thank you, Pran, so much for organizing this webinar with the CRRF, and thank you, Rene and Lois, for participating, Les Jacobs, George Day, the ISR, York University, the CSA, and all of the scholars who support my work. Thank you very much. And as well, I want to thank everyone who's listening and participating in our webinar. Land acknowledgments are also very important to me in my university. Like York University, I acknowledge its presence on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations. This area is known as Sacramento and has been taken care of by the Ashinabek Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Métis. It's now home to many indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation as well. This territory is subject of the Dishwan Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. In my part of this webinar, I'm going to talk about Kay Livingston's legacy. What are some of the lessons that can be learned and applied to the current times and context? So for myself, also I have been influenced by the discussions I've had with the late Berta Cook. And she told me about three themes that were really important for Kay Livingston's legacy: the notion of agency, Black Canadian history, and Kay Livingston, the humanitarian. So the first theme I'll talk about is agency. Agency was very important to Kay Livingston. It delineated her experiences. It was a perspective for Black women. And it was a perspective that was based on their political, and economic experiences. From all of the work that Kay Livingston and later Kaniwa and leading to the Congress of Black Women organized, these women and their work was the backbone of the Black women's movement and organizations in the 1970s and 80s that allowed for the current women's organizations to occur. Now, how do we address Black women's agency? I know that from the conferences that were organized by the CBWC, one of the concerns is for their work to be used in academia and for scholars to use the work of the Congress to talk about the contributions of Black women to the women's movement. And so I'm just going to read a little bit from an article that I wrote on the Congress. It's called Conferencing as a Site for the Mobilization of Black Feminist Identities in the Congress of Black Women of Canada between 1973 and 1983. The Congress is very significant because during the time of the women's movement, the CBWC was a part of that movement, but they found that their interests had not been represented despite the fact that the Congress had been actively organizing. So today, the lessons learned from the Congress is that Black women have to start to explore these organizations, to look at where our organizing efforts are missing from the feminist record. There is a large gap. We have to use a Black feminist perspective or a Black woman's perspective or a critical race perspective as long as it speaks to our experiences. So from the 1973 to 1983 period, there are a series of organizational conferences that were organized. And the CBWC also organized workshops concerning youth and education, the triple oppression, the women's movement, pay equity, immigration, racial profiling, institutionalized racism, health, and multiculturalism. So given the CBWC's focus on Black women and their families, understanding how these members use their identities, their ideologies, and their institutions as critical categories to interpret their experiences is significant for scholars like myself who are working in the universities and trying to document Black women's experiences. So these conferences were more than an empirical space for Black women's gatherings. They served as a time for the recovery, the affirmation, and the mobilization of Black feminist identities, as well as connecting the consciousness. So at this period, between the 1970s and 80s, when we see the emergence of the CBWC's conferences, Black women are actively organizing, but they're not highly visible. There are monolithic definitions of feminism and Black nationalist assertions, which were just unviable ideologies because they didn't articulate the voices of Black women. The challenge then, as the challenge is now, is for Black women's organizations to define their experiences on their own terms, and then for Black women, as now, to recruit Black women to these conferences. So the CBWC's conference work in Toronto, 1973, Montreal, 1974, Halifax in 1976, Windsor, 1977, and Winnipeg, 1980, to Edmonton in 1982, were these mechanisms or vehicles for mobilizing Black women in Canada. In actual and symbolic terms, the conferences sought to establish the priorities of race, class, and gender as salient points of Black women's identities. And while the Congress is a significant nodal point in the history of Black women's organizations in Canada, we know that they're part of a history, and this history is linked to Canada's socio-historical and economic development, from the enslavement of African peoples, the development of New France in the British North America, Confederation, lay organizations, the suffrage movement, as well as the women's movement today. So for Black Canadian scholars, in the process of excavating a wealth of information about the leadership roles of Black women in the CBWC conferences, have to make notice or take account of this spark that was created by these Black women and the leadership of Kay Livingston. Kay Livingston was very important in the formation of the Congress, but at the same time, without the support of those women who were in Kaniwa, in the communities across the country who supported her, the organization would not have taken off. There's an article by Springer in 2001, and she writes that recent scholarship in Black feminist studies and sociology is turning its attention to Black women's organization as a parallel development to the predominantly white women's organizations rather than as a reaction to racism. By recasting Black feminist organizations in this light, we gain a sharper picture of the development of Black feminists theorizing on the matrix of domination, as well as understanding how Black feminists articulated their agenda in concrete ways. So between 1973 and 1983, I'm just focusing on these particular conferences because they're very important in establishing a Black woman's agenda, which is linked to agency, as well as criticizing the lack of attention to race, class, and gender and the experiences that affected Black women. So during the 1970s, we know that the feminist agenda was largely set by white, middle-class, university-educated women. But I argue that this has been overstated with the effect of rendering invisible the struggles and the movement of Black women during this period. Similarly, during the 1980s, we see that Black feminist scholars have started to state that gender oppression provided a perspective for conceptualizing and asserting the equal rights for all women, but many Black Canadian scholars also use their own perspective and their own experiences to argue that gender is only one aspect of their oppression and exploitation. They have always considered the intersection of race, class, and gender as integral to their analysis. In the 1970s, also paralleling the development in Britain and the United States and elsewhere, Black Canadian women also held consciousness-raising sessions to share their experiences. When Black Canadian scholars critique these groups for reproducing the racial stratification in Canadian society, they also recognized that some of the problems were inherent in white feminist practices. White women were discussing their personal experiences with their children, with men, with motherhood, isolation, sexual harassment, and they universalized these experiences as the basis of solidarity. They represented their interests, their issues, their perspectives of white women by focusing on the family, sexuality, and socialization. B.J. Agnew has said that the feminist practices initiated debates on these issues, which were then elaborated in feminist scholarship. The identification with this agenda or alienation from it became a means of inclusion and exclusion because feminists regarded male supremacy as the most basic form of domination, and all other forms of exploitation, such as racism, capitalism, imperialism, were regarded as extensions of male supremacy. But according to Agnew, Black women did not necessarily identify with this agenda, and they didn't identify with it because it erased their experiences and it silenced their voices. They didn't fit in necessarily with this white feminist perspective because their social experiences were different. As well, class differences created these schisms within the women's movement. Feminists attributed women's sexual exploitation and discrimination to capitalist patriarchy, yet the social experiences of Black women were different from white women. For example, if we looked at the labor market was segregated by gender and racially stratified. Black women experienced discrimination from men and women as well. So for Black women, they analyzed the intersection of race, class, and gender oppression as well as the state in maintaining these hierarchical power relations. The agenda that was set by Kay Livingston and the Congress of Black Women of Canada provided the material for Black feminist scholars to discuss their experiences within Canadian society and to lodge an agenda that focused on the Black woman's experience. The second theme that I want to talk about is the whole notion of Black Canadian history. Kay Livingston and the Congress are very important in getting us to talk about Black Canadian history. Black Canadians have a history in this Canada since the 17th century. It is being recognized and acknowledged, and we see that Kay Livingston is also one of our pioneers and our leaders. And it was really important for the Congress and the legacy that she leaves to document this history. Today, we realize that it's important to continue the legacy of looking at our contributions and some of our experiences and fight against racism and anti-Black racism that's specifically related to our history in this country. It's important to document our history, our culture, our languages, and this becomes a necessary exercise in our own decolonization. So when we're looking at the Congress of Black Women of Canada, they weren't just looking at Black Canadian women. Their agenda looked at the concerns of Caribbean women, African American women. Some of their concerns also looked at the issues that affected women in the cities locally, provincially, and nationally. So although, as Lois and Rene have talked about, we are looking at a national organization that gets founded in the 1980s from the successive conferences from 1973 up to 1982. But the Congress was also important in establishing provincial structures in 8 provinces across the city, from British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, as well as establishing chapters in the local cities within those provinces. Lois has alluded to the fact that some of the chapters are in decline, but the Congress of Black Women of Ontario, Inc. is still actively recruiting members for its organization. The focus on history allows us to look at the concerns of Black women in the regions across Canada. So, for example, human rights were a concern, education, anti-apartheid, advocacy for various immigrant women's groups, women's health care, tutorials. Each of the women agreed to the mandate and the bylaws of the Congress, but at the same time, they looked at the issues that were affecting Black women and their families in the cities across Canada. Let me just go back to the theme of Black Canadian history, because in documenting our history, it's also important to talk about who are we, because the Congress was talking about Black women in this country. And today we know that anti-Black racism is an important concern that many groups are fighting. So anti-Black racism is manifested in the legacy of the current social, economic, and political marginalizations of African Canadians in this society, such as the lack of opportunities, the lower socioeconomic status, the significant poverty rates, and the overrepresentation of Black Canadians in the criminal justice system. The legacy that we looked at through Kay Livingstone and what we need to learn today is to continue to look for solutions to challenge ways in which Black Canadians and other groups have been racialized, and to ensure that this erasure does not continue. The last theme that I want to look at is the legacy of Kay Livingstone, the humanitarian. We know that Kay Livingstone was concerned for Black Canadians, but at the same time, her focus was also beyond identity politics. As a humanitarian, she spread a message of opportunity and empowerment for doing great things. Young Black girls saw her as a woman who used her agency, who used her skills as a leader to fight for the rights of all people. And I think today, what lessons can be learned and applied to the current times and context is to look at this notion of humanity and to see the ways in which we can become humanitarians. And we can do this through a strong commitment to equality, and we can do this through trying to create a strong sense of creating a just and equitable society for all groups. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer, and again, thank you to all of our panelists. At this point, we'll open it up to questions from whoever's listening, and we also have a few questions that have come in over email and that have come up during the course of our discussion naturally. And my first question is actually to the panel, and it concerns something that you've all touched on, which is essentially the concept of essentially how important it is for Black women to come together, because it seems that every time this happens, you tend to get a lot of progressive change in society and a lot of positive shifts for everyone. And I think in the last generation or so, we've seen society begin to catch up with that. For instance, things like the theory of intersectionality is used a lot more, and that was sort of written and developed by a Black scholar. In the media, we see the idea of Black girl magic showing up a lot, just showing how people recognize that I think there is inherent power to change when these groups of Black women come together. And so my first question to the panel is, reflecting on what you've heard today from each other, what advice do you have for like the current generation of individuals and activists who are working on these causes, how to support them to come together? And if you want, we can start with Lois, and then we can go around the panel.
I think the first thing we need to do is exactly that, create a safe space for them to be able to have open dialogue. There are a lot of issues that are common to the Black women that can only be shared amongst themselves. But they do need to know that there is a safe space, that they can do that, that they can share the sisterhood, they can have these discussions, and continue to reach out to them as the Congress of Black Women of Ontario does. You know, we have our monthly meetings, we advertise our monthly meetings, and we ask people to come out and say, this is a safe space, come on out and share what's going on. We had what we did last July, we had a sort of a Black Women's Cafe held in Mississauga at one of our chapters there, and we had 30 women who came out to participate. It was absolutely amazing. We started at 6:30. The intent was to end at 9 o'clock, and at 11 o'clock they were all still there sharing and talking. You know, we have got their information, and we are planning to do this again, but they talked about the space being so comfortable, being so welcoming, being amongst their own, that they could open up and talk about their issues. So that would be something that I would see us encouraging going forward. Thank you.
I would say, look at history, look at some of the issues that they're having today. Talk about them amongst each other. Get the issues out and form friendships. And as women come together, one thing that I noticed in a lot of the photos of the Negro Women's Association is that they were all laughing, they were all having a good time. It was about, if you helped your sister, you were helping yourself. It's not just about helping yourself, but helping each other. It also relates to yourself as well. So just looking out for each other, talking, and helping.
The Congress of Black Women of Canada was able to bring Black women together from across the country because they established a network. There were a range of issues that were different by city and by region and nationally. So my suggestion to some of the groups that are organizing right now is to look at some of the organizations that are in your area that can have a national focus, bring these issues to the organization. The Congress of Black Women of Canada had its local chapters, its provincial structures, and its national body to represent Black women, but at the same time, the Congress also networked with the labor movement, with the women's movement, with Aboriginal women's movement. They advocated for men. So this organization had a truly broad focus, and I would say continue to network with the Congress of Black Women of Canada. Right now, they are going through a recruitment phase where, you know, they want to have members join the organization, and Black organizations go through a period of ebb and flow. The issues that are in the current context can help to broaden the mandate and make us aware of the concerns that Black women and their families, or the concerns that community members have in the cities across Canada. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone. We had a comment come in while we were discussing, and Marie shared that when I support you, I support myself, and I just wanted to share that with the panel. Another question that came up, and it again touches on something that you've all mentioned in your presentations, and it relates to the concept of erasure and invisibility, and the fact that I think as a nation, at times we've forgotten some of the important Black Canadian history and stories. Like, I think one example that we've heard recently in the last few months is that a lot of individuals, they learn about who Rosa Parks is before they learn about who Viola Desmond is. And I think the hope is, given that she's going to be on the $10 bill, the hope is that some of these stories will be remembered and these legacies will be kept alive for the future generations. And so I've got a bit of a two-part question, in the sense that what advice or what recommendations do you have to keep these legacies alive? And secondly, who are some of the other sort of important leaders from our history that we ought to be aware of, and we ought to be using their knowledge and insights in today's work?
And I'll start. To keep the legacy alive, I mean, we see Black History Month as one of the first steps in doing that. But it's something that Black groups and the Black community must continue to talk about, to spread, to get it into the schools is something else, you know, to keep front and center the achievements and accomplishments of Black Canadians. I mean, in as much as we get to Black History Month, and I mean, when we even look at Kay Livingstone, for example, it's amazing. It's an amazing amount of things she started, and again, with the Congress taking it forward. I remember we had folks at the event on February the 17th who thanked us for including them in such a historical presentation, and yet we only tapped into just a little bit of that. So however we can continue to share that history, to bring it forward. I know we're preserving some of that at New York University. A lot of that is online. Like, I think the internet now has created a space that we won't be losing that. They can be documented, and they can be, stored forever. But we need to refer the younger generation to that and continue to do so. Thank you.
If I can, I would also say look at your families, go to your communities, and see some of the histories that are there. You can also look at some of the work and the scholarships being done. The difficulty in stating names is that we either forget some or we don't include others. So for myself, a lot of the individuals that have contributed to making great contributions have been supported by their communities. We need to look at the people, not just known, but the people who are unknown, that are constantly supporting the work so that these leaders can emerge. I know within a university setting that the work of Black women and men is important. While we talked about the Congress of Black Women of Canada, a focus for Kay Livingstone and the women that were there, Eugenie Allen, Berta Cook, Aileen Williams, and others such as, Juanita Westmoreland Traore, was to focus on Black women and men and their contributions. If we're looking for ways to theorize and think about what's being done, Professor George Day at OISE is also making a huge contribution. His scholarship, is important to the work of Black women and men. And I would just say to go and just look at some of the scholarship that's being done, look in your communities, and you just look to the people around you, and that's a starting point to include people known and unknown. Thank you.
If I may add one piece to that, Jennifer, another location that's now really preserving a lot of her Black history is a different book list on Bathurst Street. They've now expanded into something called a different book list cultural center, the People's Residence. And it will be a place that you can go to and find anything in on our Black history, especially the history of that whole Bloor Bathurst area, and all the all the Blacks that have lived in that area. I would say for the past 30, I'll take it beyond that, 50, 60 years. So there's a location that you can go and talk to the owners and see what they have in store on our history in Canada.
Absolutely. Also check out the archives and the museums that are available who have been documenting and storing this information as well.
Yeah, and I would just like to add, just talk to your friends and tell people stories that you know, which will then be passed on And it doesn't matter black or white or Chinese, it doesn't matter what color or nationality they are. Tell people the stories, and they'll tell other people the stories, and it'll keep networking and moving on. I was very amazed when we were in Ottawa and unveiling that I met a young lady, 20 years old, who wrote a thesis on my mother. So she never would have met her. And this is a 20-year-old young lady. I was very, very impressed with that, and we need more of that to continue that on.
Thank you for your responses for that. We're getting close to the end of our time, and so I just wanted to give the panelists a chance to maybe leave us all with one message. I know you've given us all a lot to choose from over the course of the last hour, but if there was one thing you really wanted to highlight to everyone listening in and everyone who will be listening later, what would that be?
Well, I would just say, know your history, get to know your history, read up on your history, and pass it along.
You know, we are a community. The black women, the black organization, the black groups, we're a community. Support each other. The quote that just came through for Prawn about I support you, I support myself, is so very valid. We talk about sisterhood in the Congress, and that simply means support your sister, support the person that you're sitting next to. That's the only way we're going to be able to move forward, is recognizing that we are all in this together and we really need to support each other. Thank you.
The whole theme of agency, diversity without a commitment to human rights and to fighting anti-Black racism becomes meaningless if we don't also address these issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to everyone for your contributions today. The Canadian Race Relations Foundation, we put webinars on a regular basis, and we are currently planning our webinar schedule for the next year. If you have suggestions, or if you'd like to share content, or you'd like to see something we discuss in one of these, please do let us know. Once again, I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Rene, Jennifer, Lois, and we will be posting an online summary of this event within the next week or so. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great afternoon.